As has been repeated over the last several days, the stories of the last weeks have mostly come from the Sufi tradition, and many of them, as we recognize, are allegorical in nature. And to answer the questions that arise from these stories and to have a deep understanding of their meaning, we have a need to bring together in us our street smarts, our experiences, our intuition, and our knowing. But there's now a question that's being posed that has a need for us to revert to a little Zen, because Zen is sharp and acute and cut to the chase. It does away with the need for us to bring together these levels of our mind to reach an awareness of what their meaning is. And the question is, what is the difference between perception and awareness? And first, there's a little Jewish Zen, and it's about a rabbi, a well-known rabbi, who had a beautiful daughter of marriageable age. And in the house of learning, there were 3 very eligible young men. So the rabbi decided to test them, to see who would be worthy to be the husband of his daughter. So he called the first young man to have tea with him one day. And as we well know, according to the strict Jewish faith, it is not allowed that anyone touch money on the Sabbath day. So when the first young man came to the rabbi posed the question to him. He said, "It is the Sabbath day, and as you're walking to the synagogue, you see a $1,000 note on the ground. What would you do?" And immediately the young man answered, "It is the Sabbath day and we do not touch money. I would leave it where it was." And so the young man went off, and on another occasion the rabbi called the second young man to have tea with him and asked him the same question. And the second young man said, "Well, a $1,000 note is only paper, and there's nothing wrong with picking up a piece of paper on the Sabbath." And so the young man went off, and the rabbi called the third young man to him and posed the same question to him. And the young man said, "Well, present the situation to me where there is a $1,000 note on the road on the way to the synagogue, and I'll give you my answer." The rabbi came to the conclusion that the first young man was too rigid and too pious in his ways, and the second young man was too frivolous, and so, as we can imagine. And of course, his daughter he gave to the third young man. Then there's a little story about Kozo. Now when Kozo went into the monastery, the abbot said to him, "Here in this monastery we do not even kill mosquitoes." Kozo said, "Not even in the meditation hall?" "No," said the abbot, "especially not in the meditation hall. Isn't that a wonderful opportunity for you to practice presence and compassion?" Well, as it so happened, the monastery was situated in a very marshy place where there are many, many mosquitoes breeding. And Kozo's flesh happened to be quite fair and juicy to mosquitoes. So he's sitting in the meditation hall with the mosquitoes buzzing around him. They land on his arms and his elbows and his feet. And he sits there stoically. But then he can feel one buzzing around his nose. The nice flesh, soft, pink flesh of his left nostril. So he could feel the mosquito buzzing around and finally landing on this very delicate piece of flesh. So he went through his thoughts. Yes, sit still. This is Zen practice. And then he thought, what about non-hurting, non-himsa, compassion, compassion, compassion. But then he could feel the proboscis of the mosquito just about to enter the soft flesh of his left nostril. And up came his hand and went smack! He said, I'll learn presence and compassion another day. But just at that moment, the whack on his shoulder. Down came the bamboo pole of the abbot. And Kozo thought to himself, well, I am a sentient being too. And maybe you'll remember that story of the great samurai Lord Takyamuni. Takyamuni was not only a very famous swordsman, but he was also a practitioner of Zen. And one day there was an occasion for him to be impelled to go out into the garden where the cherry blossoms were blooming. And so, of course, as we know with samurai lords, they never went anywhere without their sword. So Takyamuni, taking a small page boy with him out into the garden, he passed his sword to the young page boy to take care of, while he sat down on his little stool to contemplate and meditate and smell the smell of the wonderful cherry blossom. Now, Takyamuni was deep in his contemplation when the page standing by with his sword had a thought to himself, well, here I am with the great master's sword in my hand, so he's very, very vulnerable. I could even kill him in this situation. And at that very moment, Takyamuni became very uncomfortable. He had a feeling, a sensation of danger. But he opened his eyes and looked around, and there was no danger to be seen. But he finished his little contemplation, took back his sword from the young page, and went inside. But for the rest of the afternoon, all of his followers could see that he was uncomfortable. He was not at ease. And so finally, one of his retainers asked him, Master, what is it that's troubling you? And Takyamuni said, well, I was out in the garden today and I pride myself on my abilities. And I had a clear and distinct sense of danger. But when I looked around, there was no danger to be had. And this troubles me because I pride myself on my presence. And the word of this came to the young page. So he went to the master and confessed, Master, when we were in the garden, I had the thought of your vulnerability that I could kill you at that time. But instead of Takyamuni being very angry and punishing the young page, he thanked him profusely for the lesson that had been shown to him. So the question that arises out of this last story is, was it perception or was it awareness that Takyamuni had? In answering our question, what is the difference between perception and awareness? What was it that the Lord Takyamuni had in that time in contemplation in the garden? Was it perception? Was it awareness?
I think it was awareness.
So what was the lesson that he learned?
To trust his instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Or was it that he had that perception, and then when that guy came and said that, then he knew for sure that the awareness, it was awareness that he had, not perception.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say, he had that awareness of danger in his contemplation, and then he looked around, and that was him using his perception to try to confirm what he was feeling, but he didn't. In his perception, he couldn't perceive what it was, and that's why he was troubled. Because now the two weren't aligning.
So the perception of the danger is obviously to do with senses and memory and experiences, isn't it? So where do we make
with
this?
With awareness, you can actually pick up signals that are coming either from universal space or from other sources, whatever. Because you're silent, you're clear, you're able to pick them up. If you're in perception and rejecting, you can't pick up anything. But once you picked it up, then you looked around to see what was going on, and you couldn't see anything, and that confused you because you picked up the signal but couldn't see anything.
So what would you perceive as the lesson that Takyamuni was grateful for to the page?
The perception shouldn't prevail on the one.
Trust in your own intuition and what you're picking up.